So while Russia's propagandists are shifting their language from triumph to endurance, doing something that directly undermines the narrative Putin has been selling to his domestic audience for 4 years. Now, to remind you, the narrative goes something like this. Western support for Ukraine is politically unsustainable. It's politically inconsistent. European democracies will eventually tire of the cost. America will and has already significantly pulled back, and therefore this overall coalition, the alliance, will fracture. Russia just simply needs to outlast and outmaneuver. But what is being agreed in Ankara this week is the clearest signal yet that that narrative isn't just wrong, it's going completely the opposite direction. Allies are expected to formally commit about 70 billion in additional military assistance to Ukraine, not just this year, but next year as well. That's a 2-year commitment on top of the 90 billion that the Europeans did in December, January. Now, that number was actually proposed by Germany, a country that started off under Olaf Scholz being incredibly opposed to supporting Ukraine. And based on an assessment Ukraine shared with allies, it's being more influential in the willingness of Europeans to listen to Ukraine on what they actually need. Indeed, NATO diplomats describe it as a realistic level of ambition, sufficient to meet Kiev's military needs without being politically unattainable or politically risky amongst voters. Now, the significance also goes beyond the money, because for the first time, the summit declaration will formally recognize Ukraine not just as a passive recipient of NATO's support, but as an active contributor to Allied security. That is not a diplomatic language for its own sake. It reflects something very tangible. Ukraine's advances in its drone warfare, its battlefield innovation, its rapidly expanding defense industry. Indeed, all this emphasis that Ukraine is the front line and has the ability to advise NATO is now finally being recognized. Ukraine is negotiating drone production agreements with 15 NATO states. It has signed drone deals with European countries and Gulf states more broadly, and its defense industry is being integrated into NATO's industrial base in ways that would have been unthinkable 2-3 years ago. And of course, Zelensky will be at the table, invited to a dinner of NATO leaders, his second meeting with Trump in just under a month. And all of that following Zelensky himself describing as a very good conversation with Trump he had over the weekend. Trump also spoke with Putin, although the details around how that conversation went are hard to tell. Whatever comes out of these discussions, though, that a direction of travel is clear. Ukraine's financial agreements for the next 2 years are being locked in. Now, caveat, the United States is not akin to that, but its integration into the broader Western defense industry networks is accelerating, and Putin's bet that the coalition would fracture is not paying off. Indeed, one can argue that the propensity for Trump to be more sympathetic to Ukraine's perspective could also make things even worse in the next few months, depending upon whether Trump shifts on supporting Ukraine again. Putin's calculation, though, has always been that time favors Russia. What is being built in Ankara this week is a direct challenge to that calculation, and arguably the most significant strategic setback from a diplomatic or political standpoint, not directly involved yet, but it also demonstrates that at this point NATO is firmly involved in this conflict in a way that some people would have argued it hasn't been before. But more interestingly, Ukraine has figured something out that Russia is still catching up to. You don't have to match your opponent in every dimension to defeat them. Now, that might sound obvious, but you have to find the dimensions where your advantages compound fastest and press them relentlessly, the idea of comparative advantage.